Why?
I don't need to be comforted? You think
Did you say anything?
You think I'm okay?
When the thick blanket of night swallowed the bustling, chaotic streets of New Delhi, a carefully constructed life was being silently shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. The glittering, dramatized illusion broadcasted onto television screens around the world was nothing but a fragile facade, a brightly lit curtain hiding a terrifying labyrinth of psychological torture, fabricated criminal allegations, and a dark, suffocating web of familial conspiracy. Jenny Slatten and Sumit Singh, the star-crossed lovers whose boundary-defying romance once conquered the insurmountable hurdles of age and borders, were now running for their lives into the absolute unknown. A clandestine $1.2 million real estate deal forged in the shadows, a desperate midnight flight from the only home they knew, and a venomous, life-destroying ultimatum hurled by a biological mother. What truly happened during those breathless, terror-filled nights? Why did they abruptly cut the camera feeds, severing their lucrative ties with TLC, and vanish forever into the obscure shadows away from the unforgiving public eye? Today, we are pulling back the curtain to expose the darkest, most heavily guarded chapter in reality television history, a chilling sequence of events the network never wanted you to see. But before we descend into the murky depths of this unprecedented and harrowing investigation, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now, because the staggering truth we are about to uncover will permanently alter your perception of everything you thought you knew. The dusty, sun-baked, yet vibrantly alive streets of India, where Jenny and Sumit's unconventional love story first blossomed into a global spectacle, had slowly and methodically mutated into a suffocating, inescapable nightmare. While the merciless camera lenses were busy commodifying their intimate moments of joy and their most vulnerable tears, selling their raw human emotion at a premium to a ravenous global audience, a much more sinister trap was being laid just beyond the frame. Sumit's mother, Sadhna, who had aggressively positioned herself as the immovable, towering monolith blocking the path of this relationship from its very inception, decided to escalate her war of attrition. Realizing that emotional manipulation and societal pressure were failing to sever the unbreakable bond between her son and his American bride, she crossed a line that plunged the family into unparalleled darkness. She weaponized the formidable, labyrinthine Indian legal system, abandoning the role of a traditional, disapproving matriarch to become the cold, calculating architect of a flawless, devastating lie. Without a shred of hesitation, a vicious and entirely fabricated allegation of severe physical abuse was officially lodged against Jenny, a calculated strike designed not merely to separate the couple, but to completely destroy the elderly American woman's life, liberty, and sanity. The sheer paralyzing terror of facing such grave criminal accusations in a foreign land is a brand of psychological torment that only Jenny could truly comprehend. The sudden, chilling threat of the local police violently kicking down her door, the looming specter of a filthy, overcrowded foreign prison cell, and the invisible, crushing weight of a powerful, deeply connected local family orchestrating her demise transformed her daily existence into an invisible, heavily guarded prison. The confusing, terrifying maze of foreign legal maneuvers, served on cold, stamped paper by aggressive attorneys, threatened to mentally cripple her. The walls of their supposedly safe haven were closing in, vibrating with the constant, unspoken threat of imminent arrest. It was an environment of pure, unadulterated fear, where every unexpected knock, every ringing telephone, and every shadow passing by the window sent shockwaves of adrenaline through her fragile system. The ultimatum handed down by Sumit's mother was delivered with a clarity that was as absolute as it was brutal. Either sign the divorce papers and throw Jenny out into the unforgiving streets in the dead of night, or face the permanent, irreversible excommunication from the bloodline. For Sumit, this was not merely a difficult choice. It was a soul-crushing, impossible tearing of his very fabric. On one side stood the woman who gave him life, wielding his deep-seated, lifelong cultural duty like a bludgeoned weapon, and on the other stood his wife, a woman who had sacrificed her homeland, her family, her dignity, and her financial security, crossing oceans to stand by him, only to find herself utterly destitute and hunted in a foreign metropolis. Sumit was being literally and figuratively ripped in two, his heart a relentless battleground. Every square inch of their beautifully decorated home, a place they had meticulously built as a sanctuary against the world's judgment, had devolved into a toxic war zone where even the deafening silence screamed of impending doom. And hovering over this catastrophic familial implosion, like parasitic vultures, was the reality television production team. The faceless executives behind the monitors did not see a family crumbling into psychological ruin. They saw a goldmine of unprecedented viewership ratings, a sensational climax to a heavily invested storyline. They callously pressured the couple, demanding that every sob, every legal summons, and every humiliating confrontation be captured under the glaring studio lights. Jenny's agonizing mental breakdowns and Sumit's profound, paralyzing helplessness were nothing more than cheap, highly exploitative entertainment fodder for a network hungry for its next viral moment. But Sumit and Jenny refused to be the sacrificial lambs on the altar of reality television. In the depths of their despair, a fierce, primal instinct for survival ignited within them. They realized with absolute clarity that the only way to escape this venomous atmosphere, to untangle themselves from the deadly snare of fabricated criminal charges, and to break free from the ruthless, panopticon-like surveillance of the television cameras, was to burn it all down and disappear without a trace. This was a monumental, terrifying decision. The luxurious, intricately designed home they had painstakingly built on Indian soil, the physical manifestation of their hard-fought triumph over adversity, now had to be liquidated in absolute, impenetrable secrecy. They initiated a highly covert, high-stakes real estate transaction to sell their fully furnished estate. Operating entirely under the radar, communicating through encrypted channels and discreet intermediaries, they managed to secure a staggering $1.2 million deal. The transfer of this massive sum was executed with surgical precision, ensuring that the outside world, the aggressive local authorities, and most importantly, the TLC production crew, remained completely blind to their clandestine exit strategy. They understood that the hollow, fleeting fame bestowed upon them by the network was not worth their freedom, their sanity, or their lives. The reality television spotlight, which they once believed was a platform to validate their love, had proven to be a devastating curse, isolating them in a glass house while stones were hurled from every direction. The days leading up to the final signature on the property deed were soaked in a suffocating, paralyzing dread. If Sumit's mother caught even a fleeting whisper of their impending flight, she would undoubtedly accelerate the fabricated legal assault, weaponizing the authorities to have Jenny thrown into a detention center before she could ever reach the airport gates. The legal notices sitting on their kitchen counter seemed to mock them, ticking time bombs threatening to detonate their fragile escape plan at any second. It was in this crucible of immense pressure that they made the final, definitive move, severing all contractual ties with TLC. There would be no tearful, scripted farewells, no dramatic tell-all reunion episodes, and no final capitalized climax for the cameras. There was only a profound, silent resentment for a system that had exploited them, paired with a burning, desperate hunger for absolute autonomy. With the ink drying on the $1.2 million check and the oppressive Delhi heat giving way to the dead of night, they quietly packed their lives into two nondescript suitcases, preparing to step into the void. The midnight drive to Indira Gandhi International Airport was a masterclass in suffocating paranoia. Inside the claustrophobic confines of an unmarked taxi, the air was thick, heavy with the unspoken terror that their elaborate escape was already unraveling. Every sweep of passing headlights cutting through the smog-choked Delhi darkness felt like the blinding flash of a police siren, a sudden raid orchestrated by the formidable legal machinery Sumit's mother had set into motion. Jenny sat frozen, her knuckles turning bone white as she clutched the single leather satchel containing their passports and the encrypted digital ledger holding their liquidated $1.2 million fortune. For Sumit, staring blankly at the blur of neon streetlights bleeding through the smudged window, this was the ultimate, irreversible betrayal of his bloodline. He was abandoning the soil of his ancestors, fleeing like a hunted fugitive in the dead of night, driven into exile by the very woman who had given him life. The silence between them was deafening, a high-frequency hum of pure adrenaline and raw fear as they navigated the desolate, sprawling highways that separated their shattered past from their desperate bid for survival. Stepping into the sterile, hyper-illuminated concourse of the international terminal, they were abruptly stripped of the protective cover of darkness. The glaring fluorescent lights felt deeply invasive, exposing them to the predatory gaze of hundreds of surveillance cameras. Every uniformed officer patrolling the polished granite floors looked like a potential executioner of their newfound freedom. Had the draconian legal injunctions filed by Sadhna's aggressive attorneys already metastasized into a nationwide travel ban? Was there a silent red alert flashing next to Jenny's name on a heavily encrypted government database, triggered by the vicious, fabricated allegations of elder physical harm? They moved with a rigid, unnatural, forced casualness, attempting to blend into the exhausted tide of red-eye travelers, but internally, they were vibrating with a primal panic. The massive TLC production apparatus, a ruthless corporate monolith that thrived on exploiting their misery, was completely unaware that their most profitable assets were currently slipping through their fingers. If network executives or private investigators caught wind of this midnight exodus, the ensuing breach of contract lawsuits and emergency court injunctions would have legally chained them to the burning wreckage of their lives in India forever. The true crucible, the agonizing bottleneck of their escape, was the sprawling maze of the immigration and passport control checkpoint. This was the razor-thin border between total annihilation and absolute salvation. As they approached the cold, glass-enclosed booth, the air in their lungs seemed to instantly evaporate. Jenny slid her blue American passport across the stainless steel counter, her facial muscles locked in a desperate, stoic mask to conceal the sheer terror threatening to crack her composure. The uniformed officer took the document, his face an unreadable, hardened mask of bureaucratic indifference. He swiped the barcode. The digital scanner emitted a sharp, sterile beep that echoed in Jenny's ears like a gunshot. Time completely fractured, stretching seconds into agonizing, unbearable hours as the officer's eyes darted between the glowing computer monitor and Jenny's pale, sweat-slicked face. Behind the screen, unseen algorithms were searching for outstanding warrants, criminal complaints, and the very fabricated assault charges that Sumit's mother had meticulously planted to ensure Jenny's destruction. Sumit stood agonizingly close, yet entirely powerless, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped animal, bracing for the devastating sound of an alarm, for the heavy hands of security to pull them apart, for the iron gates of a foreign prison to slam shut. And then, a sound cut through the suffocating tension, the heavy, mechanical thud of an ink stamp hitting paper. The officer slid the passport back across the counter without a single word, a silent, bureaucratic dismissal that felt like the absolute deliverance of a higher power. The iron grip of the Indian legal system, manipulated and weaponized by a vengeful matriarch, had miraculously failed to close its jaws around them. As they practically ran toward the boarding gate, the sheer magnitude of what they had just accomplished began to hit them. Boarding the massive commercial airliner, the heavy cabin doors sealing shut with a pressurized hiss sounded like the final definitive lock clicking on their past. When the roaring engines thrust the aircraft down the runway, tearing them away from the earth, the crushing gravitational pull of their nightmare finally broke. Looking down through the scratched acrylic window at the sprawling, amber-lit grid of New Delhi, fading into the blackness below, Sumit silently wept, mourning the death of his old identity, mourning the family he would never speak to again, while simultaneously gripping Jenny's hand with a fierce, unbreakable conviction. They were now ghosts, wealthy exiles floating 30,000 feet above the Indian Ocean, untethered from the toxic reality that had nearly consumed them alive. When the landing gear slammed onto the tarmac of Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport, the transition was jarring, violently contrasting the oppressive, smog-heavy atmosphere of Delhi with the sharp, cold, salt-laced winds of the Australian coast. But the arrival in this pristine, modern metropolis did not instantly wash away the deep psychological scars or the paranoid vigilance that had become their second nature. Stepping into the sprawling urban anonymity of Sydney, they were acutely aware that they were carrying a massive, invisible target on their backs. The $1.2 million, heavily laundered through international wire transfers and offshore holding accounts to avoid the aggressive financial scrutiny of TLC's legal hounds, was their only armor in this alien landscape. The network, furious and blindsided by the sudden, catastrophic loss of their star couple, would undoubtedly unleash a swarm of corporate attorneys and private investigators to track them down, demanding astronomical financial reparations for shattered non-disclosure agreements and abandoned filming schedules. To survive in Sydney, they could not simply start a new life. They had to completely eradicate their digital footprints, burying Jenny Slatten and Sumit Singh in the graveyard of reality television history, and resurrecting themselves as entirely untraceable entities in the concrete jungle of the Southern Hemisphere. Sydney was not merely a sanctuary. It was a sprawling, sun-drenched fortress of glass and steel, where Jenny and Sumit had to meticulously architect their own disappearance. The sheer, terrifying irony of their new existence was not lost on them. The very individuals who had once bared their most vulnerable, agonizing realities to an audience of millions were now fighting a daily, silent war to achieve absolute invisibility. They secured a high-rise apartment under heavily layered corporate aliases, paying exorbitant sums through a complex web of offshore holding companies and decentralized financial nodes to ensure their physical address remained an impenetrable fortress. The $1.2 million they had smuggled out of their former life was no longer just wealth. It was a heavily guarded arsenal, funding their clandestine survival in one of the most expensive cities on the planet. But the transition from international reality television stars to untraceable ghosts required a brutal psychological metamorphosis. They had to systematically assassinate the public personas of Jenny Slatten and Sumit Singh. Physical appearances were drastically altered, hair colors changed, wardrobes entirely replaced with unremarkable, muted tones designed to deflect attention, and the fundamental way they moved through public spaces was recalibrated to avoid the omnipresent glare of smartphone cameras and facial recognition software. Every trip to a local Sydney grocer, every quiet walk along the sweeping, salt-sprayed cliffs of the coastline was executed with the hypervigilance of hunted fugitives, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds for the sudden, terrifying flash of recognition in a stranger's face. Meanwhile, back in the boardrooms of New York and the suffocating courtrooms of New Delhi, the fallout of their midnight exodus was nothing short of apocalyptic. The monolithic corporate machine of TLC, completely blindsided by the sudden evaporation of their most highly rated, controversial stars, unleashed a relentless, multi-million-dollar manhunt. Network executives, furious at the catastrophic breach of ironclad non-disclosure agreements and the sudden collapse of their meticulously planned production schedules, mobilized an army of aggressive corporate litigators and private, military-grade investigators. They demanded astronomical financial reparations, deploying ruthless legal hounds to scour international flight manifests, track credit card anomalies, and subpoena digital communications. Simultaneously, in India, the vicious legal trap constructed by Sumit's mother, Sadhna, violently snapped shut on a completely empty cage. The fabricated, life-destroying warrants for Jenny's arrest were served to a vacant, locked property, the echoing silence of the empty halls mocking the very authorities sent to execute the raid. The realization that her son had not only chosen his foreign wife, but had successfully orchestrated a brilliant, million-dollar disappearing act right under her nose, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of a destroyed family legacy, was a devastating psychological blow from which the matriarch would never recover. The aggressive private investigators hit a massive, insurmountable brick wall of international jurisdictional nightmares and dead-end shell companies. Sumit and Jenny had effectively vanished into the digital and physical ether, leaving behind a trail of financial breadcrumbs that vanished into the depths of the Pacific. As the frantic, high-stakes global pursuit dragged on, yielding nothing but exorbitant legal bills and cold leads, the oppressive, suffocating paranoia that had gripped Jenny and Sumit slowly began to fracture, letting in the blinding light of true freedom. The paralyzing night terrors that once woke Jenny in cold sweats, vivid hallucinations of Indian police breaking down her door, or TLC producers cornering her in a claustrophobic studio, began to fade into the quiet hum of the vibrant Australian metropolis. They began to realize that the massive, invisible target on their backs was dissolving. The network, bleeding capital on a fruitless chase, was forced to quietly abandon the hunt, cutting their losses and pivoting their cameras to the next disposable couple. In this newfound, heavily defended vacuum of isolation, stripped of the toxic familial expectations, the manufactured television drama, and the constant, suffocating public scrutiny, Sumit and Jenny discovered the raw, unfiltered core of their relationship. Without the blinding studio lights and the venomous interferences of traditionalist saboteurs, their love was no longer a desperate battleground. It was a quiet, unshakable sanctuary. They had traversed a literal and metaphorical hellscape, sacrificing their identities, their homeland, and their pasts, all to protect the one undeniable truth of their existence: each other. Standing at the jagged, wind-swept edge of Watson's Bay, the colossal waves of the Pacific Ocean violently crashing against the ancient sandstone cliffs below, the magnitude of their impossible victory finally settled over them. The roaring wind drowned out the lingering ghosts of New Delhi and the hollow echoes of the reality television empire they had successfully dismantled. They had stared directly into the terrifying abyss of absolute ruin, facing fraudulent imprisonment, total financial destitution, and the complete annihilation of their family ties, and they had orchestrated a brilliant, masterfully executed escape that left their tormentors grasping at shadows. The story of Jenny Slatten and Sumit Singh is no longer a tragic, exploitative spectacle served up for cheap evening entertainment. It is a legendary, chilling testament to the terrifying lengths human beings will go to fiercely protect their freedom and their love against the darkest, most oppressive forces of manipulation. They are out there right now, breathing the cold, free air of an anonymous life, the ultimate victors of a war the world never truly saw. If this relentless, heart-pounding journey into the darkest hidden corners of reality television has captivated your mind and completely shattered your perspective on what happens when the cameras stop rolling, do not leave this page just yet. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel immediately, and turn on all notifications, because we are just scratching the surface of the terrifying truths they desperately want to keep buried in the shadows.